So now that Biden's new bill has been signed into law, many states will be putting more money towards the crisis relief programs. That's going to provide more financial aid to Americans. So in this video, I'll be discussing the latest news about the fourth stimulus check. You want to be sure to stay until the end of this video. And when President Biden signed the $1.2 trillion bill into law, it was history in the making. For years, infrastructure was frequently talked about in Washington, without much real subsequent action.
Let me close with this. Throughout our history, we've emerged from previous crises stronger than we were before the crisis. One of the few nations in the world done that. Every major crisis has occurred in American history. Every one. We've come out stronger after it than before it happened. Because we invested in ourselves. During and after the Civil War, we built the Transcontinental Railroad, uniting us, East and West, creating jobs and opening up America in a way it never occurred before. During the Cold War, we built the interstate highway system, transforming how Americans live their lives, allowing us to spread out across the nation. And now, as we work to put the COVID-19 pandemic behind us, we will build an economy of the 21st century. It matters. On Monday, I held a virtual meeting for 3.5 hours almost with President Xi Jinping of China. Years ago, when I was vice president, I was in China with him. We were near the Tibetan plateau, and we had over 25 hours of private meetings. Me and an interpreter, and he an interpreter. We got to know one another. Well, guess what? He turned to me one day, this is God's truth, my word is abiding, and said, can you define America for me? And I said, absolutely, in one word, possibilities. Possibilities. We're the only nation in the world that believes everything was within our ambit. There's nothing impossible once we set our mind to it. It's never been a good bet, as more world leaders have hear me say, it's never been a good bet to bet against America. Never. There's no limit to what the American people can do. No limit to what our nation can do. Because folks, and this is just not a political speech, I believe this is a fact of history. No limit. Given half a chance, just half a chance, the American people have never, ever, ever, ever let the nation down. Never. Because of this Michigan delegation, this new law gives our people a chance, more than half a chance. We're at an inflection point in world history. Things are changing, not just here, across the world. And the question is, how do we respond to it? What do we do? I truly believe, and I give you my word as a Bidenist, I truly believe that 50 years from now, historians are going to look back at this moment, the last 2 years, and the next 4 or 5 years, and they're going to determine whether or not, in that moment, did America win the competition for the 21st century, or did we lose it? Because that's where we are. All the pieces on the globe are changing. But we got to get back in the game, folks. We don't have to hurt any other nation. We got to get back in the game now. Because, by the way, if we don't get back in the game and able to do it, who else is going to deal with the crises in the Middle East? Who else is going to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian issue? Who else is going to deal with all those issues that affect? Who else is going to be the nation that decides?
I think we've seen now for the past 10 months or so what Democrat governance looks like, and it's one crisis of competence after another. Whether it's what's happening, the disaster at the border, at the ports, the pileup out there, what's happening in our cities when it comes to safety of our communities. You can literally go right down the list and just see example after example of where Democrat governance is leaving the American people high and dry. And as the leader pointed out, the most obvious example of that is probably inflation. They passed a $1.9 trillion bill in March and that has fueled these inflationary pressures. Instead of listening to what the American people are saying about that, their reaction to it, which I think the generic ballot, which shows the Republicans with the largest lead in 40 years, the Democrats seem to be covering their ears and just trying to ignore the problem, because what they're talking about with this reckless tax and spending spree is flooding the zone with even more spending, more dollars, chasing too few goods, leading to more and higher inflation. And just give you an example of what that looks like year over year.
Without much action being done, and that changed with the Biden administration. Now comes the hard part, implementing what the administration calls a once-in-a-generation investment. States could receive anywhere from $2 billion to $45 billion in non-granting funding for projects, like roads, bridges, and electric vehicles. So the Biden administration released fact sheets detailing how the landmark legislation will be allocated to states and territories. The states receiving the most funding might not be surprising. It's California, Texas, and New York, at the top of the list in total dollars. And so far, nearly $1 trillion in federal relief has been sent out to U.S. households through the 3 stimulus checks. It's credited with reducing poverty and helping millions of families without a crisis. And multiple states are also moving to distribute payments. A handful of states are tapping their own stimulus funds or surpluses to help specific residents, like low-income households or even teachers. That's all done with direct aid, reaching more than 25 million people starting this month. So about 1 in 4 households across the country struggle to pay their household expenses. In Arizona, out-of-work residents can take advantage of the state's back-to-work program. Those who go back to work part-time are eligible for $1,000, and those returning to full-time workers could get $2,000. Now, California did implement the Golden State stimulus. That's all to residents required to have filed their 2020 tax return by October 15th. And about half of the 9 million residents received their checks as of October 31st, and the remaining checks are being sent by mail. So a salary of $30,000 to $75,000 per year qualified California residents to receive $600 and $1,100 for those with children under the age of 18. The Connecticut governor also announced the Back to Work program. It's going to send out $1,000 stimulus checks starting on May 30th, and it will continue through the end of the year. The requirements are more involved in other states, with specifics on when residents filed for unemployment and how long they were on unemployment. Now, Senate Democrats will try to negotiate with Manchin and Sinema to try to address their disagreements on the size and scope of Biden's economic package as it heads to the chamber. During a new briefing, Schumer told reporters the House did a very strong bill, and everyone knows that Manchin and Sinema have their concerns, but we're going to try to negotiate with them and get a very strong, bold bill out of the Senate, which will then go back to the House and pass. Schumer held a briefing to stress the importance of including a provision in the Build Back Better bill that will lower the cost of insulin, and the bill passed by the House last week capped what Americans pay for insulin at $35 a month. Everybody, what are your thoughts on the Democrats and Republicans? Who's holding back our stimulus payments? I want to know your thoughts on this.